This is talking about lesson 11A from the book Straightforward Elementary, and you're going to need several things for this lesson. This is the student's book, and these are the teacher's book notes. There's 4 pages of these, and the audio script can be found in here as well, so you can see the words that are in the audio file. And this is the language reference page from the back of the student's book. It gives you an idea of the grammar that is in this particular unit. And the other thing you're going to need is the audio file. So that's 4 different things: the student's book, the teacher's book notes, the grammar reference, and the audio. Okay, so let's start having a look at this material. So the first part introduces the topic and focuses on the vocabulary of jobs. This is pretty straightforward. You might want to do some kind of warmer, maybe brainstorming different jobs, asking students to talk about someone in their family and what job they have, something like that. And then show them the pictures, show them the words. So the pictures are these ones here, and the words in the blue box, and ask them to match the words to the pictures. You can do this as a class, or you can put the students into pairs for that. An alternative approach would be to describe the job and try to elicit it from the students. So for example, it's someone who works in a hospital and they help people to get better. Try to elicit doctor. Of course, you might get nurse from that. That's the first part. So eliciting some vocabulary, doing some drilling of the problem items. Accountant is a tricky word to say. Secretary is a tricky word to say. But equally, I think these days maybe we don't use the word secretary. We might use admin assistant or something like that. So please feel free to adjust the vocabulary to something more modern. Waiter is quite a tricky word to say as well, and security guard. The pronunciation is not tricky, but look at the spelling of guard, so that will put people off. Students will say guard or something like that. So there are several things here you might want to highlight for the students in terms of pronunciation. Lots of drilling. Exercise 2, you really don't need it. You can do that checking yourself. Don't use the recording, just check the answers yourself. Number 3, again, I don't think you need the recording. If you want to read out the sentences yourself and the students underline, then do that. But there's no need to use the audio file. And we're looking for collocations here between the verb work and the different prepositions that are used. So I think it's also useful to point out that you work for a company, but you work at a college or in an office. So watch out for problem areas there. But I would do exercise 3 as is. Don't use the audio, but you read out the sentences, and then maybe go back and clarify any of the ones that you think might be difficult, like, for example, the difference between work for a company and work at a building. Number 4 is a chance to do some speaking. So put the students into pairs or groups and get them to talk about those questions. If you want to adapt the questions to be more suitable to your learners, then you can easily do that. And that will complete the vocabulary section. There are other ideas in the teacher's book notes, so please feel free to have a look and change it if you want. I don't recommend that we do the pronunciation part. It does look nice, but I don't think it's going to fit into the timing of the lesson. The next part of the lesson is a listening skills activity. I would suggest adapting this a little bit. So that first part, exercise 1, behind the scenes, I find it takes me about half an hour to teach the words behind the scenes and what it means, which is not very useful. So I would suggest that we adapt the first listening task. First of all, set the scene. Tell the students that they're going to listen to 2 people talking about their jobs. And then you could adapt exercise 1, and instead of that first listening being like it is to add the words into the gaps, I'd probably just said a couple of really simple questions like, where does Janet work? Where does Michael work? Or what job does Janet do? What job does Michael do? Do they like their jobs? Something like that. So simple questions. Then play the audio and then check the answers. So what job does Janet do? What job does Michael do? Do they like their jobs? Check the answers. So now students are ready for a more in-depth task. So we need to set the task before they listen. Remember, it's really important to always set a task before students listen or read. Don't set it afterwards, otherwise it becomes a test. What we're trying to do is develop their listening skills. Exercise 3 looks okay. It's a true or false task, and the students only have to write T or F, so it cuts down on the writing. I think it's okay. I don't think there's any vocabulary that needs pre-teaching. There is accounts department. I'm hoping that will have been, the word accountant will have been clarified in the vocabulary section. So check with the teacher who's doing the vocabulary, if it's not you, to make sure that accountant has been taught, because you might need to clarify accounts department. Set the task, tell them what they need to do, then play the audio, then get the students to check in pairs with a partner, or if you're in an online class, I would say to them, talk together about the answers and I will listen, and then you can just listen in and get a feeling for whether you need to play it again. If you feel you need to play it again, do that, and then again get the students to check in pairs or talk in their group, and then do the feedback. I think the feedback needs to be visual. You can just put number 1 T for true or F for false. You don't have to write out the whole thing, but I think they're going to need to see the answers. Following it orally, they're going to have problems, I think. That's the end of the listening section, but there's a nice activity in number 4 there to provide a bit of speaking after the listening. So you can leave that as it is or adjust it to your students and get the students talking in pairs or groups of 3 about that. Again, if you're in an online environment, you could break off into breakout rooms to do that task. Or if you want it to be quicker, you could just ask 2 or 3 of the students to talk and get the others to ask questions. So you could say, for example, Amir, can you tell me about someone in your family or someone you know? What is their job? And maybe change that second question. So do they like their job? And then when Amir is finished speaking, you could say, does anybody have any questions to ask Amir about his friend or family member? So you can make everybody involved in that task, even in the online big group. Then we move into the grammar. So you can see down the box there's a lot of information about the grammar. It's very dry presented like this. Here's a box, read it. Not really. I don't think so. We've got a better way to go about it. Let's look at that. So I think the best way to go about doing the grammar is first to see what they know. Let's see where the problem areas are first, rather than lecturing them on this subject. So exercise 1, there are questions. Decide which questions are correct and which are incorrect. So this is going to give us a lot of information about where the students are at. So I'd recommend doing this in pairs or small groups if you're in the face-to-face classroom. If you're in an online class, maybe do it together, but try to make sure that you give people time to look at it and to think about it, to make a decision about the answers, then do some feedback and try to nominate people to involve everybody. Otherwise, we'll have some quiet person who never we never find out whether they know it or not. So are they correct or incorrect? So clarify that. Number 2, look at the audio script. I don't recommend we do that. That will take all day and I don't think we need to. So instead, do exercise 1, and then check the answers together as a class. And while you're checking the answers, you can ask why, and that will help to elicit the rules behind it. So, for example, I'm looking at question number 2, when did start you here? I would say, so what's the answer, Amir? And Amir says, when did you start here? And I could ask why. Why is that? And maybe Amir will say, oh yes, did plus subject plus base verb. Or maybe he'll just say, sounds good, or maybe nothing at all. But it would allow us to find out what Amir's knowledge of this is. After that, I think it'd be a good idea to get something onto the board that shows the structure of these questions. So elicit out from them what goes first. Oh, it's one of these question words. Why, where, what, when. What goes next? Do or did. What goes next? The subject. And continue like that. Be good to make that visual in some way, using the whiteboard, using a PowerPoint slide, and eliciting from the students, just to show really clearly the order of the words. Exercise 3 is nice. Putting in the right question word. I think the students should be fine with this, shouldn't have too many problems. So get them to do it alone and then compare in pairs or compare as a group, and then check the answers. You could then move on to exercise 4, which could be done in pairs or in groups. And then we could move on to some practice that's a little bit more complicated. And that would be for me speaking exercise 1 and speaking exercise 2. Now, this is one of those things that looks deceptively easy, but can be quite complicated to set up, but it's worth it, I think. You will need to demonstrate this first, okay? Demonstrate it yourself. So what I would do is I would say, okay, do you remember we looked at jobs earlier? Do you remember any of those jobs? Elicit a few jobs from the students. And then I'd say, right, I'm thinking of one of those jobs. I'm thinking of it. I'm not going to tell you. You ask me questions and then see if you can guess which job I'm thinking of. I think you're going to need to check the instructions there. Like, am I going to tell you the job? No. What are you going to do? Ask questions. And are you trying to guess the job? Yes. And then demonstrate it. So, right, I'm going to think of one. I'm thinking of one. Okay, ask me questions. You can use the questions from exercise 3 and do that and demonstrate it. And then get them to do the same thing. So choose a strong student and say, right, Amir, you choose a job. Don't say what the job is, but you choose one. Right, everybody ask Amir questions. And then they ask Amir. And it all goes swimmingly well. It's marvellous. Tell them that they can use the questions from exercise 3 or any other questions. Hopefully, while they're doing it, you might hear some errors in the question form. Write those down on a piece of paper. And then at the very end of the activity, you can say, oh, that went really well. Well done, everybody. I heard some things that were really good. And you could tell them the good things. And I heard some mistakes. Somebody said, where you are from. Where you are from. Let's try to correct that together. Alternatively, while they're speaking, you write down examples of good things that you hear and errors. Then at the end, write those on the whiteboard or type them onto your interactive whiteboard slide or onto a Word document, and then show those to the students and get the students to decide which ones are correct, which ones are not correct, and then together try to correct the non-correct ones. Okay. There is another exercise on the page, which is about the NHS. I've left that out because I think it's quite complicated. But if you think that will be a really good topic for your students, then include that activity, and you can